Welcome to Final Curiosity. Today's story transports us to the year 1858, tracing the life of Daniel Cross, a man compelled to witness the sale of his wife and children, whose subsequent actions would etch a permanent mark upon history. This is a painful, intense tale of loss, endurance, and repercussions that still reverberate through time. Pause for a moment, breathe, listen closely. Before we start, subscribe to our channel and share in the comments which city and country you're joining us from. Your engagement ensures these stories remain remembered, not buried. Let's begin. In the spring of 1891, in a small town just outside Toronto, Canada, an elderly black man drew his final breath. His name was Daniel Cross. He was 71 years old. His hands, once powerful enough to bend iron, now lay peacefully upon his chest. Gathered around his bed were his wife Ruth, his 3 children, and his 11 grandchildren. To his wife of 50 years, he whispered his last, simple words. "I found them all, Ruth, just like I promised." Only Ruth could comprehend the immense weight carried by those 7 words. Because 53 years earlier, in a place called Natchez, Mississippi, Daniel Cross had made a vow that would transform him from the most obedient slave in the county into the most feared man the American South had ever encountered. This is not merely a story about slavery. This is a story about what occurs when you strip everything from a man who has nothing left to lose. This is the story of Daniel Cross, and what he did in 1858 still haunts the history books to this very day. Let me take you back to an era when human beings were bought and sold like livestock, back to a place where skin color dictated whether you lived as a person or died as property. Back to Natchez, Mississippi, at the heart of what was called the Cotton Kingdom. Perched high on a bluff overlooking the Mississippi River, Natchez in 1858 stood as one of the wealthiest cities in the entire United States. It housed more millionaires within its borders than New York City, and every single dollar of that wealth was built upon the backs of the enslaved. The soil surrounding Natchez was rich and dark, ideal for growing cotton. And in those days, cotton was king. It fueled the economy of the entire nation. Northern factories spun it into cloth. Southern planters grew wealthy selling it. And the enslaved people who planted, picked, and processed it received nothing but suffering in return. Roughly 12 miles outside the city lay a plantation named Thornwood, spanning over 4,000 acres of prime cotton land. At its center stood a white, columned mansion visible for miles. The house contained 14 rooms, each furnished with imports from France and England. Crystal chandeliers hung from every ceiling, silver candlesticks lined every mantel. From the outside, Thornwood resembled a palace, but for the 847 enslaved people who lived and worked there, it was a prison. A beautiful, elegant prison where families were torn apart, bodies were broken, and hope went to die. The owner of Thornwood was Colonel Edmund Whitmore. In 1858, he was 62 years old, a third-generation plantation owner whose grandfather had carved the estate from raw wilderness back in 1795. Colonel Whitmore stood 6 feet tall with silver hair and a thick, meticulously waxed mustache. He wore white linen suits even in the brutal Mississippi summer. He attended church each Sunday, donated generously to local charities, and was considered one of the county's most respected men. He was also, by any reasonable measure, a monster. Colonel Whitmore possessed a habit, a very costly habit. He gambled. Cards, horses, dice, it did not matter. If there was a way to wager money, Edmund Whitmore would find it, and he almost always lost. Over the years, his gambling had drained the family fortune. Debts piled high, creditors circled like vultures. Yet Whitmore had a solution for every financial problem. He simply sold his slaves. Families that had lived on Thornwood for generations were ripped apart whenever the colonel needed to settle a debt. Mothers sold away from children. Husbands separated from wives. Brothers and sisters sent to different corners of the South, never to see one another again. To Colonel Whitmore, these were not human tragedies. They were simple business transactions. Among the hundreds enslaved at Thornwood, one man stood out. His name was Daniel Cross. In 1858, he was 38 years old and served as the plantation blacksmith. Daniel was not especially tall, perhaps 5'10", but his shoulders were broad, and his arms were thick with muscle forged over decades at the anvil. His hands were remarkably scarred and calloused, yet capable of incredible precision. He could shape iron as a sculptor shapes clay. He could transform raw metal into anything: tools, horseshoes, hinges, locks, weapons. Whatever was needed, Daniel could make it. His skill made him exceedingly valuable. Plantation owners from across the county sent their broken equipment to Thornwood just for Daniel to repair. They paid Colonel Whitmore handsomely for the privilege. A skilled blacksmith was worth more than a dozen field hands, and Whitmore knew it. That is why Daniel received certain privileges denied to other slaves. He had his own cabin near the forge. He was permitted a small garden. He was never whipped, because damaged hands meant damaged profits. In the twisted economy of slavery, Daniel Cross was an asset to be protected. But none of these privileges mattered to Daniel. None at all. Because everything he cherished, everything that made his life worth living, was not his skill, his cabin, or his garden. It was his family. Daniel had been born on Thornwood in 1820. He never knew his mother. She was sold when he was 3 years old, sent to a Louisiana plantation. He never learned her name, never saw her face, never heard her voice. She existed only as an absence, a hole in his heart that never fully healed. His father lasted a bit longer. Daniel remembered him as a tall, quiet man who labored in the cotton fields from sunrise to sunset. When Daniel was 7, his father attempted escape. They caught him 2 days later, about 15 miles north of the plantation. The overseer made an example of him. He was whipped until his back was raw meat, then left tied to a post in the summer sun. He died 3 days later from infection. Daniel witnessed it all. He was 7 years old. After that, Daniel learned the most crucial lesson a slave could learn: keep your head down. Work hard. Never complain. Never resist. Never give them reason to notice you. Survival meant invisibility, so Daniel became invisible. He worked at the forge. He perfected his craft. He spoke only when spoken to. He never looked a white man in the eye. He never raised his voice. For 30 years, Daniel Cross was the perfect slave, the model of obedience, and he despised every single second of it. Then, when Daniel was 22, something changed. A wagon arrived at Thornwood carrying a group of newly purchased slaves from a South Carolina plantation. Among them was a young woman named Ruth. She was 18, slender and tall, with eyes that seemed to hold secrets. She had been sold after her previous owner died, and his estate was liquidated. She was assigned to work in the big house as a cook. Daniel first saw her carrying water from the well. She moved with a quiet dignity he had never seen before. Most slaves walked with hunched shoulders, eyes on the ground, beaten down by years of degradation. But Ruth walked straight, not defiantly, not foolishly, but with an inner strength nothing could touch. He found excuses to pass by the kitchen. He lingered near the well when she fetched water. For weeks, they barely spoke, just glances, small nods, the beginning of something neither dared to name. One night, Daniel found her sitting alone behind the smokehouse, crying silently. He sat beside her without a word. They stayed like that for an hour, two strangers sharing the weight of an unbearable existence. Finally, she spoke. "They sold my sister today. She was 12. I raised her after our mother died, and now she's gone. Daniel offered no empty comfort. He did not say it would be all right, because they both knew it would not. Instead, he told her about his mother, his father, the emptiness that never faded. For the first time in his adult life, Daniel Cross opened his heart to another human being. They were married 6 months later. It was not a legal marriage, of course. Slaves could not legally wed. The law did not recognize their humanity, let alone their love. But they held a ceremony anyway, conducted by an old preacher named Samuel from the slave quarters. They jumped the broom, the traditional slave wedding ritual. They spoke vows to each other. Until death or distance do us part. That was how slave marriages went, not until death, but until death or distance, because everyone knew the master could separate them at any moment. But Colonel Whitmore, for once, was not cruel about it. Daniel was too valuable to upset. A happy blacksmith worked better than a miserable one. So the marriage was permitted. Daniel and Ruth were given a small cabin together, and for the first time, Daniel Cross knew something like happiness. Then came the children. Samuel was born in 1843, named after the preacher who married them. He grew up strong and serious, with his father's broad shoulders and his mother's watchful eyes. From age 10, he worked in the cotton fields. Even a blacksmith's son was not exempt from the harvest. But every evening he would come to the forge, watching his father work, learning the secrets of fire and metal. Eliza came next in 1846. She was a gentle child, quick to smile and slow to anger. She helped her mother in the big house kitchen, learning to cook the elaborate meals the Whitmore family demanded. She had a gift for it. Her biscuits were so light they practically floated. Her pies won praise even from the mistress, who rarely praised anything. And then there was Benjamin. Little Benjamin, born in 1851, he entered the world on the same night the mistress gave birth to her youngest son. 2 babies born hours apart, one in the big house, one in the slave quarters. One destined to inherit thousands of acres and hundreds of human beings, the other destined to be property himself. Benjamin was the joy of Daniel's life. Where Samuel was serious and Eliza gentle, Benjamin was pure sunshine. He laughed constantly. He asked 1,000 questions a day. He followed his father everywhere, fascinated by the sparks from the forge, the hiss of hot metal in water, the transformation of raw iron into useful tools. Daniel would hold him on his knee and tell stories. Not of Africa, for Daniel had no such tales to tell. His family had been in America for generations, their homeland forgotten, their history erased. But he told stories of hope, of a place up north where black people were free, of a future that might differ from the past. For 16 years, Daniel built his life around his family. Every swing of his hammer, every hour at the forge, every moment of obedience and submission, it was all for them. He would protect them. He would keep them together. He would ensure what happened to his mother and father never happened to his wife and children. He believed that if he were good enough, obedient enough, valuable enough, they would be safe. He was wrong. The morning of March 14, 1858, began like any other. Daniel woke before dawn, kissed Ruth's forehead, and walked to the forge. The fire already burned, fed by the young apprentice who slept in the corner. Daniel began his work, shaping a new axle for a plantation wagon. The rhythmic clang of hammer on metal filled the air. The sun rose. The day commenced. Around mid-morning, a wagon arrived at the main house. Daniel noticed it from a distance but thought nothing of it. Wagons came and went constantly. A delivery of fabric for the mistress, tools for the fields, nothing unusual. But then he heard screaming. It was Ruth's voice. He knew it instantly, in his bones, the way a man knows his own heartbeat. And it was a scream of pure, absolute terror. Daniel dropped his hammer and ran. He ran faster than ever before, heavy boots pounding the dirt path, lungs burning. The sound grew louder as he neared the main yard. More voices now, children crying, men shouting. When he reached the yard, a scene was etched into his memory forever. Ruth knelt in the dirt. A white man Daniel did not recognize held her by the hair, dragging her toward the wagon. She clawed at the ground, screaming, fighting with everything she had. But she was small, and he was strong, and it did not matter. It never mattered. Samuel was already in the wagon, his hands bound with rope. Blood ran down his face from a gash above his eye. He had fought. Of course he had fought. He was his father's son. But 3 men had beaten him into submission. Now he sat slumped against the wooden slats, barely conscious. Eliza stood frozen near the kitchen door, her apron still tied. 2 men approached her. She wasn't screaming or crying, just staring, her face blank with shock, her mind unable to process what was happening. And Benjamin, little Benjamin, was in the arms of another white man, squirming and crying, reaching toward the chaos, calling for his mother, calling for his father. Daniel did not think. He did not plan. He simply charged. He made it 3 steps before the first overseer tackled him. Then another, then another. It took 5 men to bring Daniel Cross to the ground. 5 men to hold him down while he thrashed and roared like a wounded animal. They pressed his face into the dirt. They drove knees into his back. Someone struck his head with something hard, and the world went gray. When his vision cleared, Colonel Whitmore stood over him. The colonel smoked a cigar, looking down at Daniel as one might regard a mildly interesting insect.
"Now, Daniel,"
Whitmore said, his voice calm and reasonable. "You are far too valuable to lose. I have invested greatly in your training. Your skills bring this plantation considerable income. So I'll overlook this little outburst. But you need to understand something." He crouched, bringing his face close to Daniel's. "Your family is not valuable. Your wife is a decent cook, but I have a dozen women who can cook. Your son is strong, but I have hundreds of strong young men. Your daughter is pretty, but pretty girls are easy to find. And your youngest, well, children that age are hardly worth the food they eat." Whitmore stood and brushed dust from his white trousers. "I have debts, Daniel, significant debts, and Mr. Cornelius Finch here has offered me a fair price for your family. It is simply good business." Daniel lifted his head and looked at the man beside Whitmore. Cornelius Finch was a slave trader from New Orleans, well known throughout the region. A small man with a thin mustache and eyes like a rat. He specialized in what the trade called fancy goods, a polite term for the sale of women and girls for sexual exploitation. He also dealt in bulk labor for the most dangerous industries: coal mines, sugar plantations, railroad construction, places where life expectancy was measured in months, not years. Finch consulted a small leather notebook. The woman will bring a good price in New Orleans. Still attractive despite her age. The older boy will go to the coal mines in Virginia. Strong back, should last a few years. The girl, he smiled in a way that froze Daniel's blood. "I have a special buyer in Atlanta who pays premium prices for girls her age. And the little one, well, children are always in demand." Daniel heard the words, but they felt unreal. This could not be happening. Not after everything he had done. Not after 16 years of perfect obedience. Not after swallowing his pride, burying his anger, accepting humiliation after humiliation, all to keep his family safe. Ruth still lay on the ground. She had stopped screaming. She looked at Daniel now, and in her eyes he saw something that shattered him completely. It was not fear. It was not despair. It was a question he could not answer. "Why are you not saving us?" The men began loading them into the wagon. Ruth first, thrown in like a sack of grain. Then Samuel, still bleeding, half-conscious. Then Eliza, walking mechanically, eyes empty. Finally Benjamin, still crying, still reaching out, still calling for his father. Daniel fought against the men holding him. He twisted, pulled, screamed until his voice gave out. But it did not matter. Nothing mattered. The wagon began to move. Ruth managed to sit up. She looked back at Daniel. And in that moment, she spoke the words that would change everything. Find them. No matter how long it takes. Find our children. Then the wagon turned a corner, and they were gone. The overseers released Daniel. He lay in the dirt for a long time, staring at the empty road. The sun beat down. The world continued around him. Somewhere a bird sang. Somewhere a horse whinnied. Life went on as if nothing had happened, as if a man's entire reason for living had not been ripped away. Finally, an overseer kicked his ribs. Get up. Get back to work. That axle isn't going to fix itself. Daniel stood slowly. His body was present. His hands moved. He walked back to the forge. He picked up his hammer. He struck the metal. Clang, clang, clang. The rhythm continued. The work went on. But inside Daniel Cross, something fundamental had shifted. The man who returned to that forge was not the same man who had left it an hour before. That man, the obedient slave, the perfect worker, the invisible survivor, was dead. In his place stood something else, forged in grief and rage and a terrible, consuming purpose. Daniel Cross would find his family, and everyone who had taken them from him would pay. In the weeks following the sale, Daniel continued his work at the forge. He spoke when spoken to. He completed every task. He gave no indication that anything had changed. The overseers, expecting grief or rage or a foolish escape attempt, were relieved. The valuable blacksmith had accepted his loss. Things could return to normal. They had no idea. Every night alone in his cabin, Daniel planned. He could not read or write, or so everyone believed. The truth was, Ruth had taught him in secret years ago, using a Bible stolen from the big house. Teaching a slave to read was illegal in Mississippi, punishable by severe whipping or worse. But Ruth had taken the risk, night after night, tracing letters by candlelight, sounding out words, opening a door meant to remain forever closed. Daniel had learned, and he had never told anyone. Now that secret knowledge became his greatest weapon. He began to gather information, slowly, carefully, listening to conversations he was not meant to hear, watching, waiting. Cornelius Finch had taken his family to New Orleans. That much he knew. But New Orleans was merely a distribution point. From there, they would be sold again, scattered across the South. Daniel needed specific information, exactly where each family member had been sent, and he needed to do it without suspicion. His opportunity came 3 weeks after the sale. A wagon arrived from a neighboring plantation with a broken wheel hub. The driver was an enslaved coachman named Thomas, known for hearing things. Gossip, rumors, news from other plantations. Information flowed through the network of enslaved people, like water through underground channels, invisible to white eyes, but vital for black survival. Daniel repaired the wheel. As he worked, he asked casual questions that could be explained as idle curiosity. Had Thomas heard anything about the slaves sold from Thornwood? Did he know where they had been sent? Thomas looked at Daniel for a long moment. He understood what was really being asked, and he understood the risk of answering. But Thomas had lost a brother to the slave trade 10 years earlier. He knew the pain, he knew the desperation, and so he spoke. Ruth had been sold to a place in New Orleans called the Magnolia House, a high-end brothel in the French Quarter catering to wealthy white men. Women sold there rarely lasted long. Abuse, disease, and despair usually killed them within a few years. Samuel had been sold to the Harrison Mining Company in Virginia. Coal mines, backbreaking work in dark tunnels, breathing poisonous air, facing cave-ins and explosions. The average life expectancy for a slave in those mines was 3 to 5 years. Eliza had been purchased by an Atlanta judge named Cornelius Brandt. Thomas said no more, but the look in his eyes said enough. Everyone knew what men like Judge Brandt wanted with young girls. And Benjamin, little Benjamin, had been sold to a family in Vicksburg, Mississippi. A planter named Marcus Webb had bought him as a companion for his 19-year-old son, a living toy, a punching bag, an object for casual cruelty. Daniel memorized every detail, every name, every location. When Thomas left, Daniel returned to his forge with a new fire burning inside. He now knew where his family was, 4 different locations, 4 different states, hundreds of miles apart. An impossible task for any man, an impossible task for a slave who could not travel freely, who had no money, no resources, no allies. But Daniel Cross was not any man, and he had one advantage no one suspected. He knew how to make things. Any things, including what he would need to wage a one-man war against the institution that had destroyed his family. Over the next 6 months, Daniel worked in secret. By day, he completed his normal duties, horseshoes, tools, wagon repairs, everything Colonel Whitmore expected. But at night, by the dim light of his forge, he created other things, a knife, thin and deadly, designed to fit inside the hollow handle of his favorite hammer. He could carry it anywhere without suspicion. A set of lockpicks forged from scrap metal, capable of opening any lock he had ever encountered. He had spent years repairing locks for plantation owners across the county. He knew their weaknesses intimately. Keys. Master keys copied from originals that passed through his forge for repair. Keys to sheds, storage buildings, the big house itself. A length of chain with deliberately weakened links. It looked identical to regular chain, but could be broken with a single sharp pull. And something special, something he worked on only in the darkest hours, certain no one would see. Daniel was preparing for war, but weapons were not enough. He also needed information. He needed routes between plantations, patrol schedules, locations of safe houses along the Underground Railroad, contacts who could help a fugitive slave disappear. For this, he reached out to the invisible network among the enslaved. A whispered word here, a meaningful glance there. Slowly, carefully, he gathered intelligence. An old woman in the laundry had a cousin in Memphis who knew a conductor on the railroad. A field hand who had once escaped and been recaptured had learned routes through the swamps. A house servant overheard the master discussing the reward system for capturing fugitives, revealing how the hunters operated. Piece by piece, Daniel assembled a map, not on paper, which could be discovered, but in his mind. Routes, contacts, safe houses, danger points, all committed to perfect memory. By September 1858, he was ready. September 12 was a moonless night, chosen deliberately. Darkness would be his ally. He also chose it because Colonel Whitmore would be away, attending a horse race in Vicksburg. The overseer in charge during the colonel's absence was a man named Patterson, a drunk usually unconscious by 9. At midnight, Daniel made his move. First, he went to the slave quarters. Not all, just the cabins of those he trusted. 23 men and women who had been waiting for this moment. Daniel had recruited them carefully over the past months. Some had families sold away, others simply could not bear another day in chains. All understood the risks. If caught, they would be tortured and killed. But they also understood that some things were worth dying for. Using his copied keys, Daniel unlocked the main storage shed. Inside were supplies they would need: food, blankets, tools. They moved silently, loading what they could carry. Then Daniel walked to the stables. He did not take the horses. That would be too obvious. Instead, he did something else. He opened the hay barn door and used forged tinder to start a small fire in the back corner. It would take about 15 minutes to spread, long enough for him and the others to disappear into the woods, long enough to create chaos and confusion, delaying any pursuit. The fire caught. Orange flames licked the dry hay. Daniel watched for a moment, then turned and ran. They met at the forest's edge. 23 shadows in darkness. Daniel led them north, following paths memorized from countless conversations and scraps of information. They moved quickly but carefully, avoiding roads, sticking to streams and gullies where dogs would lose the scent. By dawn, they were 12 miles from Thornwood. Behind them, smoke still rose from the burning plantation. Ahead lay freedom or death, probably both for some. At a fork in a creek, Daniel stopped. The others looked at him expectantly. "This is where we separate," he said quietly. "The railroad contacts are 2 miles north. They will take you to the next station, and from there to the border. Do not stop. Do not hesitate. Do not look back." An old woman named Harriet stepped forward. She had been a field hand for 40 years. Her back was bent, her hands gnarled, but her eyes were sharp. "You are not coming with us." It was not a question. Daniel shook his head. "I have something I need to do first." Everyone knew what he meant. Everyone had heard about his family. No one tried to stop him. One by one, they embraced him. Then they disappeared into the darkness, heading north toward Canada, toward freedom, toward a new life Daniel had made possible. Daniel watched them go. Then he turned south. Everyone expected a fugitive slave to run north. That was where freedom lay. That was where the Underground Railroad led. Every patrol, every slave catcher, every bounty hunter would be looking north. No one would expect him to go south, deeper into slave territory, closer to the heart of the system that had destroyed his family. That was exactly why he did it. Daniel Cross was not running away. He was running toward something. Toward Ruth in New Orleans, toward Samuel in Virginia, toward Eliza in Atlanta, toward Benjamin in Vicksburg, toward the men who had taken everything from him, and toward a reckoning that would echo through history. The journey from Mississippi to New Orleans covered roughly 300 miles. For a white man on horseback, it was a 5-day trip. For a fugitive slave on foot, moving only at night, avoiding every road, town, and farmhouse, it was a journey of nearly 3 weeks. Daniel moved like a ghost through the Louisiana wilderness. He had learned to read the land as others read books. Stars told direction, animal behavior warned of approaching humans, soil texture revealed whether a path was frequently traveled or long abandoned. He ate what he could find. Berries, roots, the occasional rabbit caught in a vine snare. He slept during the day hidden in thickets, hollow logs, or abandoned buildings, always with one eye open, always ready to run. Reward posters appeared within a week of his escape. Colonel Whitmore had offered $50,000 for Daniel's capture, the largest bounty in Mississippi history. The posters described him in detail: age 38, height 5'10", muscular build, scarred hands, skilled blacksmith. They warned he was dangerous and possibly armed. They authorized deadly force if necessary. Daniel saw one nailed to a tree near Baton Rouge. He stood in shadows and read his own description, his own price, $50,000, more than most white families earned in a decade. Every bounty hunter, slave catcher, and poor farmer seeking easy money would be searching for him. He smiled grimly and continued south. On October 3, 1858, Daniel Cross reached New Orleans. The city overwhelmed the senses. The smell of the river mixed with cooking spices, rotting garbage, and something sweet, flowers or decay. Music, shouting, and clattering carriages filled the air at all hours. And the people. Thousands upon thousands, white and black and everything between, crowded into narrow streets where buildings leaned like gossiping neighbors. New Orleans was the largest slave market in the United States. Tens of thousands of enslaved people passed through its auction houses yearly, bought and sold like livestock. But it was also a city where free black people lived, worked, and owned businesses. A city where a black man could walk down the street without immediate suspicion if he looked like he belonged. A city where Daniel could disappear into the crowd while searching for Ruth. He found work at a blacksmith shop in the Faubourg Marigny, owned by a free black man named Jean-Baptiste Mercier. Daniel introduced himself as a freedman from Virginia traveling south for work. His skills spoke for themselves. Within a day, Mercier hired him. For 2 weeks, Daniel worked and gathered information. He asked careful questions about the city's geography, businesses, underground economy. He learned the Magnolia House was in the French Quarter, on a quiet street near the river. One of the most exclusive establishments of its kind, catering to wealthy planters, politicians, and businessmen. The women there were kept under close guard. They were valuable property not to be damaged or lost. Daniel also learned the Magnolia House had a back entrance used for deliveries and removing women who had become too sick or broken to be profitable. This entrance was guarded by a single man between 2 and 5 a.m. when business was slowest. On the night of October 17, Daniel made his move. He approached the back entrance at 3 a.m., carrying a bag of tools from the blacksmith shop. He walked with the confident stride of a man who belonged. A delivery or repairman. Nothing unusual. The guard, a heavy-set white man with a pistol on his hip, looked up. "Delivery," Daniel said, holding up the bag. "Lock needs fixing on the 3rd floor. Madam sent for me." The guard frowned. "Nobody told me about any delivery." Daniel shrugged. "You want to wake Madam and ask her, 'Be my guest.'" But she wasn't happy about that lock. Said it's been broken a week and nobody's done nothing. The guard hesitated. Waking the madam for something trivial was a good way to lose a job, or worse. After a long moment, he stepped aside. "Make it quick." Daniel nodded and walked through the door. The interior was dark and quiet. Clients had gone home. Women were locked in their rooms. Daniel moved silently through corridors, checking each door, listening for any sound indicating where Ruth was held. He found her on the 2nd floor. The door was locked, but locks had never been a problem for Daniel. He pulled out his picks and went to work. 30 seconds later, the mechanism clicked open. The room was small and bare, a narrow bed, a wash basin, a single window covered with iron bars. On the bed, curled into a ball, was Ruth. She had aged 10 years in 6 months. Her hair, once thick and black, was streaked with gray. Her face was gaunt, cheeks hollow. Her arms bore bruises in various stages of healing. She was so thin Daniel could see her ribs through her worn cotton shift. But when she opened her eyes and saw him, something sparked back to life, something that had been dying slowly in that room for months. "Daniel." Her voice was barely a whisper. She thought she was dreaming. She had dreamed of rescue, of escape, so many times, and every time woke to find herself still trapped. But Daniel was real. He crossed the room in 2 strides and gathered her into his arms. "I came for you," he said, "just like you told me to." Ruth began to cry, silent tears, because even now she knew better than to make noise. Daniel held her, letting her cry, feeling her body shake against his, feeling the bones beneath her skin, the weight of everything she had endured. But there was no time for grief. "Can you walk?" he asked. Ruth nodded. She would crawl if she had to. She would drag herself through broken glass to get out. Daniel helped her up, wrapped his coat around her shoulders, and led her back through the corridors, past the sleeping guard, out the back door, and into the New Orleans night. They were 2 blocks away when the Magnolia house exploded into flames. Daniel had left a gift behind, a small device constructed at the forge, a container of whale oil connected to a slow, burning fuse. By the time anyone noticed the fire, it had spread to the upper floors. By the time the fire brigade arrived, the building was fully engulfed. 23 men died in the Magnolia House fire. Newspapers called it a tragic accident, a lamp left burning near curtains. Carelessness costing lives. No one suspected arson. No one connected it to the fugitive slave from Mississippi. But Daniel knew, and Ruth knew. And for the rest of their lives, neither spoke of it. Daniel and Ruth spent 2 weeks hiding in the attic of a New Orleans safe house, a station on the Underground Railroad run by a free black woman named Adelaide. During those weeks, Ruth slowly regained strength. She ate. She slept. She began to look like herself again. But she also told Daniel everything, every detail, every horror. She needed him to understand why what they were doing was not just justified but necessary. When she finished, Daniel sat in silence for a long time. Then he spoke. "I am going to find the others. Samuel, Eliza, Benjamin. I am going to bring them back." Ruth looked at him. She did not try to talk him out of it. She knew it would be pointless. Instead, she surprised him. "I am coming with you." Daniel started to protest. The journey would be dangerous. She was still weak. If caught together, they would both die. But Ruth stopped him with a look. "They are my children too. I did not carry them for 9 months, nurse them through fevers, watch them take their first steps just to let someone else rescue them. If we die together. But I am not staying behind." Daniel knew better than to argue. And truthfully, he did not want to. He had spent 6 months alone, carrying grief and rage like a physical weight. The thought of facing what lay ahead with Ruth beside him was more than a comfort. It was a lifeline. On November 1st, 1858, Daniel and Ruth left New Orleans, heading north toward Virginia. The journey to the Harrison Mining Company took 2 months. Winter had arrived, roads were muddy and treacherous. But the cold worked in their favor. Fewer patrols. Fewer bounty hunters willing to brave the elements for reward money. They moved steadily northward, staying in safe houses when possible, camping in wilderness when not. They arrived in Richmond, Virginia, in late December. The coal mines lay about 30 miles west, in Appalachian foothills. Daniel found work at a city blacksmith shop, as in New Orleans. Ruth found work as a laundress for a wealthy family, a position allowing her to gather information about regional mining operations. The Harrison Mining Company was owned by Harrison Cole, 45, a former Army officer who had invested his pension in coal mining and made a fortune. He owned 300 enslaved workers laboring 12 to 16 hours daily in his mines. The work was brutal beyond description. Men crawled through tunnels barely tall enough to kneel in, hacking at coal seams with picks and shovels, breathing dust that blackened lungs. Cave-ins were common, explosions frequent. The average life expectancy for a slave in the Harrison mines was 3 years. Samuel had been there 9 months. Daniel learned from local black community contacts that Samuel was still alive. But barely. He had lost 3 fingers in a mining accident. He coughed constantly. Assigned coal dust was destroying his lungs. He had been whipped twice for working too slowly. But he was alive. That was all that mattered. The mines were heavily guarded. Unlike plantations with open fields, mines were contained spaces with limited access. Armed guards patrolled entrances. Slaves were locked in barracks at night. Escape was nearly impossible. But Daniel had not come this far to be stopped by guards and locks. On Christmas Eve 1858, while Harrison Cole and his family celebrated with a lavish dinner, Daniel put his plan into action. He had spent weeks studying the mine's layout. He knew the main shaft had 3 ventilation tunnels connecting to the surface. Too small for an adult to crawl through, but large enough to drop things into. Things like smoke bombs made from sulfur and charcoal, designed to fill tunnels with choking fumes and force evacuation. At 9 p.m., Daniel lit smoke bombs and dropped them into 2 ventilation shafts. Within minutes, thick gray smoke poured from the mine entrance. Guards shouted in confusion, bells rang. Slaves stumbled out of tunnels, coughing and gasping for clean air. In the chaos, Daniel slipped into the mine through the 3rd ventilation shaft, which he had left clear. He moved through darkness with a small lamp, searching for Samuel. The tunnels were a maze, branching and intersecting senselessly to anyone unfamiliar. But Daniel had bribed a former mine slave for a map, and he followed it faithfully. He found Samuel in a side tunnel near the mine's rear. His son was barely recognizable. 9 months of brutal labor had transformed the strong young man into a skeleton. Ribs showed through skin. Eyes were sunken. His right hand was wrapped in dirty bandages covering stumps where fingers used to be. He sat against the tunnel wall, too weak to move, waiting for orders. When he saw Daniel, he did not believe it. He thought smoke had affected his mind, a dying vision sent to comfort him. But then Daniel spoke. "Get up, son. Your mother is waiting." Samuel's eyes went wide. Then, for the first time in 9 months, he smiled. Daniel carried his son through tunnels and out the ventilation shaft. They emerged into cold night air surrounded by chaos. Guards ran everywhere, trying to organize evacuation, account for slaves, figure out what happened. No one noticed 2 shadowy figures disappearing into the forest. But Daniel was not finished. 3 hours later, after Samuel and Ruth were safely hidden in a farmhouse 5 miles away, Daniel returned to the mining camp. Chaos had subsided. Slaves were herded back into barracks, guards returned to posts. Harrison Cole himself had come from his house to survey the situation, still dressed in Christmas dinner finery. Daniel watched from forest darkness. He waited until Cole stood alone near the mine entrance, shouting orders. Then Daniel stepped from shadows. Cole saw him and frowned. "Who the hell are you?" Daniel did not answer. He walked toward Cole with slow, deliberate steps. Cole reached for his hip pistol, but Daniel was faster. He grabbed Cole's wrist, twisted it, and heard bone snap. The pistol fell. Cole screamed. Daniel picked up the pistol and pressed it against Cole's forehead. "My son worked in your mine for 9 months. He lost 3 fingers. He will cough blood the rest of his life. I want you to know why this is happening to you." Cole's eyes widened with terror. He tried to speak, to beg, to offer money. But Daniel was not interested in words. He dragged Cole to the edge of the deepest mining shaft, a vertical drop over 200 feet into darkness. "This is for Samuel," Daniel said, and pushed Harrison Cole into the pit. The scream lasted a long time. Then it stopped. Daniel disappeared into the night. By morning, he was 50 miles away, heading south toward Atlanta with Ruth and Samuel. The journey to Georgia took another month. Samuel was weak. They moved slowly. But he grew stronger daily. Fresh air helped his lungs, food helped his body, and knowing his father had come for him, had walked into hell to bring him out, helped his spirit. Ruth told Samuel about the Magnolia house, the fire. Samuel listened in silence. When she finished, he looked at his father with new understanding. "How many more?" he asked. "2," Daniel said. "Your sister and your brother. Then we are done." Samuel nodded. He did not ask for details. He did not need to. He understood what his father was doing, and he wanted to help. They reached Atlanta in early February 1859. The city was smaller than New Orleans, but growing rapidly, fueled by railroads connecting it to the south. It was a city of merchants, lawyers, politicians, people who considered themselves civilized, who would never dirty their hands with slavery's crude business. They simply profited from it quietly. Judge Cornelius Brandt was one such person. 67 years old, a respected Georgia judiciary member for over 30 years. Known for harsh sentences, particularly for slaves who committed crimes against white property. He was also known in certain circles for his particular taste as young girls. The younger the better. He purchased them, used them, and when they grew too old for his interests, sold or gave them away. It was an open secret among Atlanta's elite, but no one spoke of it. He was a judge, after all. He was above the law. Eliza had been in his house nearly a year. Daniel spent 3 weeks watching the Brandt residence, a large brick mansion on Peachtree Street. He learned the judge's routine, servant schedules, which rooms Eliza was kept in. He learned everything. And then he learned something else that changed his plans. Judge Brandt was dying. Diagnosed with stomach cancer, he had perhaps 6 months left. He was already weak, rarely leaving his bed, with additional servants hired for his final days. Daniel had planned to kill him quickly. A knife in the dark, a silent end to a monstrous life. But now he reconsidered. Death was too good for Cornelius Brandt. On the night of February 23, 1859, Daniel entered the Brandt mansion through a second-floor window. The judge's bedroom was on the 3rd floor at a hallway's end. Daniel moved silently through the house, avoiding servants, climbing stairs, reaching the door. He picked the lock and stepped inside. The room smelled of sickness. Judge Brandt lay in a massive 4-poster bed, propped on pillows, face pale and gaunt. He was awake, reading legal documents by candlelight. When he saw Daniel, he did not scream. He simply looked with tired eyes. "Have you come to rob me?" Daniel walked to the bedside. He looked down at the man who had taken his daughter, done unspeakable things to her for nearly a year, would have continued until she was broken beyond repair. "No," Daniel said. "I have come to make sure you suffer." What happened over the next 3 hours was never officially recorded. Servants heard nothing. Neighbors heard nothing. When they found Judge Brandt the next morning, he was still alive, but begging them to kill him. He begged for 47 more days before death finally came. The doctor said it was cancer and complications. Nothing suspicious. But Daniel knew, and somewhere in whatever hell awaited men like Cornelius Brandt, the judge knew too. Eliza was found in a locked 2nd-floor room. She was thin and silent, eyes empty, spirit nearly extinguished. But when Daniel carried her out and brought her to Ruth, something in her began to heal. Her mother held her, cried, told her it was over. Finally over. And Eliza believed her. One more. Just one more. Benjamin was in Vicksburg, Mississippi, less than 50 miles from Thornwood. Daniel was returning to where it all began. They traveled west through Alabama into Mississippi. Daniel sent Ruth Samuel and Eliza ahead to Memphis, where Underground Railroad contacts would keep them safe. He would meet them after retrieving Benjamin. But first, there was something he needed to do. Vicksburg sat on high bluffs overlooking the Mississippi River. A strategic, wealthy city, a center of commerce and culture. The Webb family lived in a white, columned house on Cherry Street, overlooking the river. Marcus Webb was a cotton broker who had made a fortune buying and selling others' crops. His son, also named Marcus, was 19, a spoiled young man who had never worked a day. Benjamin had been his toy for almost a year. Daniel did not bother with subtlety this time. He did not watch. He did not plan. He walked up to the Webb house front door in mid-afternoon and kicked it open. The elder Marcus Webb was in the parlor reading a newspaper. He looked up in shock as Daniel entered. "What is the meaning of?" Daniel hit him once, A single blow to the temple. Webb collapsed unconscious. The younger Marcus came running downstairs, riding crop in hand, ready to discipline whatever slave caused disturbance. He stopped when he saw Daniel. "Who are you?" "I am Benjamin's father." Color drained from young Marcus's face. He knew. He knew what he had done. He knew what he deserved. He tried to run. Daniel caught him at the stairs' foot. The riding crop clattered to the floor. Daniel dragged him into the parlor and threw him against the wall. Mrs. Webb appeared upstairs, screaming. Daniel ignored her. "Where is my son?" Young Marcus cried, tears and snot running down his face. He pointed toward the house's rear. "The shed. He's in the shed. Please, I didn't mean." Daniel hit him again harder. Young Marcus went down and did not get up. Daniel walked through the house and out the back door. The shed was a small wooden structure near the property's edge. No windows, door padlocked. Daniel broke the lock with a single rock blow. Inside, curled on dirty straw, was Benjamin. He was 8 now, but looked younger. Tiny, malnourished, covered in bruises and welts. He flinched when Daniel entered, raising hands to protect his face. "Please," he whispered. "I'll be good. I'll be good." Something broke inside Daniel. Something held together through months of travel, violence, vengeance. He fell to his knees beside his son and pulled him into his arms. "It's me, Benjamin. It's your father. I came to take you home." Benjamin did not believe at first. He had stopped believing in hope long ago. But Daniel held him, whispered to him, rocked him gently, as he used to when Benjamin was a baby, when the world was safe and simple and full of promise. Slowly, Benjamin began to cry, then to hold on, then to believe. Daniel carried his son from the shed and walked toward the house. The elder Webb lay unconscious on the parlor floor. The younger Webb groaned, trying to crawl toward the door. Mrs. Webb had fled, likely to summon help. Daniel looked at the 2 men on the floor. He thought of what they had done to Benjamin. The beatings, humiliation, casual cruelty, treating a child as a toy to be used and discarded. He had killed for less, but Benjamin watched. Benjamin held on with desperate strength, eyes wide and frightened. Daniel realized some things were more important than vengeance. He walked out without looking back. But before leaving Vicksburg, he stopped at the local newspaper office. He left an anonymous note detailing what the Webb family had done to an enslaved child. Within a week, the story spread across Mississippi. The Webbs were ruined. Their business collapsed, friends abandoned them. They eventually fled to California, where no one knew their names. It was not death, but for people like the Webbs, it was worse. One name remained on Daniel's list: Colonel Edmund Whitmore, the man who started everything, who sold his family, who told Daniel while 5 men held him down that his wife and children were not valuable. Daniel sent Benjamin ahead to Memphis with a trusted railroad conductor. Then he turned south toward Natchez, toward Thornwood, toward his journey's end. Arriving at the plantation, he barely recognized it. The fire he set during escape had destroyed stables and spread to several buildings. But that was only the beginning. In months since Daniel's flight, Thornwood had fallen apart. The mass escape of 23 slaves triggered panic. Dozens more fled. Cotton was not harvested properly. Creditors seized much land. The great White House still stood, but was a shadow of its former glory. Paint peeling, windows broken, gardens overgrown. Colonel Whitmore was alone. His wife left him, children distanced themselves, friends abandoned him. Gambling debts that caused him to sell Daniel's family had multiplied. The reward money posted for Daniel's capture was never claimed. He was ruined. Daniel found him in the library, surrounded by empty bottles, staring at nothing. The once proud plantation owner was a broken old man waiting to die. Daniel stood in the doorway. Whitmore did not notice at first. When he finally looked up, his eyes took seconds to focus. "Daniel." His voice cracked. "You came back." Daniel stepped into the room. In his hand, he carried the object forged for months before his escape. The object planned from the beginning. It was a chain. Not just any chain. A blacksmithing masterpiece. Each link perfectly formed, polished to a shine, etched with intricate patterns. Along its length, carved into metal with painstaking precision, were 147 names. Every slave Edmund Whitmore had sold in his lifetime, every family destroyed, every life shattered. Daniel had spent years gathering those names, memorizing them, honoring them. Now they were immortalized in iron. Daniel placed the chain on the table before Whitmore. "Do you know what this is?" Whitmore looked at the chain. He squinted at the names. His face paled. "These are the people you sold," Daniel said. "Everyone had a mother, a father, children, dreams. You took all that away. You treated them like animals, worse than animals, and you never lost a moment's sleep over it." Whitmore opened his mouth to speak, but Daniel continued. "You told me my family was not valuable. Remember? You said my wife was just a cook, my son just a strong back, my daughter just a pretty face, my baby not worth the food he ate." Daniel leaned close. "I found them all. Everyone. I brought them back, and everyone who took them from me is dead or wishes they were." Whitmore trembled. He understood now. He understood what Daniel had done, what Daniel was capable of. "Please," he whispered. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I didn't know. I didn't understand." Daniel looked at him. This man who had owned him, controlled every aspect of his life for 38 years, wielded life and death power over hundreds with casual cruelty. "You knew," Daniel said. "You just didn't care." What happened in that library over the next several hours was never officially recorded. Servants had fled, neighbors long since stopped visiting. No one witnessed what Daniel Cross did to Colonel Edmund Whitmore. But stories persist. Whispered tales passed down through generations in Mississippi's black communities. They say Whitmore was found 3 days later, still alive, the chain wrapped so tightly it cut into flesh. They say he begged for death for weeks before it came. They say his screams could be heard for miles. Daniel Cross left Thornwood for the last time as sunrise-colored cotton fields. He did not look back. There was nothing left to see. 6 weeks later, Daniel crossed into Canada with his family. They settled in Buckton, a small town about 50 miles east of Detroit, a community founded by former slaves where black people could own land, start businesses, raise families in peace. Daniel never touched a forge again. He had spent enough life working with fire and metal. Instead, he became a teacher, instructing other escaped slaves to read and write, giving them tools to build new lives. Ruth opened a boarding house, secretly serving as an underground railroad station. For years, she sheltered fugitives, heading to freedom, feeding them, clothing them, helping them disappear into the Canadian wilderness. Samuel studied medicine. Despite lung damage from coal mines, he became one of Ontario's first black physicians, treating patients with no one else to turn to. Former slaves, free blacks, poor whites who could not afford white doctors. Eliza never fully recovered from Atlanta. She never married, rarely spoke of that time, but found purpose caring for children. She founded an orphanage for black children, many sons and daughters of slaves who did not reach freedom. She raised them with fierce love, determined they would never know her horrors. And Benjamin, little Benjamin, bought as a rich man's son's toy, became a lawyer. After the Civil War ended slavery, he returned to the United States. For 40 years, he tracked former slave owners, bringing them to justice. He won case after case, securing compensation for former slaves, exposing crimes of the plantation system, ensuring the world never forgot. Daniel Cross died on March 14, 1891, exactly 33 years after his family was sold. He was surrounded by his wife, children, 11 grandchildren, and countless lives touched as teacher and railroad conductor. His last words were to Ruth, "I found them all, just like I promised." Ruth held his hand, smiling through tears. "I know you did. I always knew you would." Daniel was buried in Buckton Cemetery, beside other former slaves who made the journey to freedom. His tombstone bears no mention of 1858-1859 events, no Magnolia House, Harrison Mines, Judge Brandt, Webb family, Conal Whitmore, or chain with 147 names. Simply reads Easter's Daniel Cross, the 1820-1891 husband, father, teacher. He kept his promise. Daniel Cross's story was never written in official history books. Contemporary newspapers recorded events as accidents, coincidences, unrelated tragedies, a New Orleans brothel fire, a Virginia mining accident, a judge dying naturally, a family ruined by scandal, a plantation owner found dead. But truth survived in other ways. In whispered stories passed parent to child in black communities across the South, in songs of a man who walked into hell and brought his family back, in legends of a blacksmith who forged his own justice when law refused. Now you know the truth too. Daniel Cross was not a saint. He killed. He burned. He did things no law could condone. But he did them for the only reason that ever mattered. He did them for love. The system that enslaved him was vast, powerful, protected by law, custom, tradition. It told him his family was property, his love worthless, his children sellable like animals with no right to object. Daniel Cross disagreed, and he was willing to burn the world down to prove it. Some called him a monster. Some called him a hero. Truth lies somewhere between. But one thing is certain, when they took everything from Daniel Cross, they made a mistake. They created something far more dangerous than a slave. They created a man with nothing left to lose and everything to fight for. And in the end, that man won. This was the story of Daniel Cross, a story that haunts history, a story never to be forgotten.